Welcome to Real People, Real Matters. This is Diana Tulchinsky with my first guest, Patty Marfise. Patty, please tell me where you grew up in Chicago.
I grew up on the south side of the city, at like 79th and Western, the neighborhood that was there.
Interesting. And tell me about like your early childhood there.
My early childhood was really fun living in the city. We played with all the kids on the same block on the same street, regardless of the ages. So there was always something to do or someone's house to be at.
And where did you go to high school?
I went to Queen of Peace High School that was also on the southwest side. It was actually right in one of the suburbs just over the Chicago border. So there were girls from all over the city and all over the southwest suburbs.
And what kind of community was like in your high school, like for arts and cultivation of like?
So there really wasn't too strong an art community at our high school. I think there probably wasn't the budgeting at that time in the late 70s for art education. Most of the art education I did outside of school, and particularly at the Chicago Park Districts.
Wow. And when did you pick up like pottery and ceramics?
I did. So my first pottery class was when I was 9 years old. We had a neighbor who worked part-time at the Ridge Park in one of the other parks and suggested I take a ceramics class. So that was a couple of neighborhoods over from my house. So after I took a first couple of classes, my parents let me take 2 Chicago city buses there and back, which I'm not sure I'd let my 9-year-old do that today, but I did it then. It was a lot of fun.
And like, what were like the techniques were you introduced to?
So when I was young?
Yes.
So the techniques I was introduced to when I was young were hand building techniques, working with slabs of clay, pinching clay to form objects. And then a little bit later, when I was a little bit older, I worked on a pottery wheel.
Oh, okay. And then did you throw a wheel and do the glazing and everything else?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Threw on a wheel. We fire it twice, bisque fire it, then fire it a second time with glaze on it. So I did all of those things.
And with your education, like where did you go to get your bachelor's from?
So I got my bachelor's degree at Northern Illinois University in DeKalb. I absolutely loved it. I loved being out in DeKalb. I didn't want to be too far from home, so I ended up there. And I didn't major in art. I was a double major in history and political science. But I've taken a pottery class pretty much continuously since I was 9 years old. There were a couple of years that I didn't. But pretty much I've just always taken classes on the side.
And where did you get your teaching background?
So I taught high school history and a little bit of high school English right out of college for about 20 years. I started teaching ceramics and pottery about 7 years ago.
And why did you choose teaching of all the professions? You could have been like a professional artist or which you are. But.
Right now I'm a professional artist,
Yeah.
right? But out of college, going into college, I didn't really have a lot of choices from my family. The choices they were giving me at the time were not go to college, be a secretary, be a nurse, or a teacher. And I thought teacher was a better profession for me. I was more suited for that at the time. When I was in college, my mom wanted me to study computer science, but I was already on my way with a double major. So when I was at Northern, I was able to very easily pick up a secondary teaching certificate. I thought I might want to go to law school and was saving money for law school. So I was going to teach for a few years, and then I just fell in love with teaching.
And did you have a mentor in high school or in college that steered you the right way?
You know, not really. I know this was one of your questions, and I really thought about it. I really didn't have a mentor in high school or college. I've had a number of mentors at Lil Street Art Center, where I have been the last 13 years, who have been very encouraging and very good for my psyche. But I didn't back then.
And tell me, like, what was your first like internship or teaching experience in Niles North or like the Niles Township District?
Well, actually, I worked my way up to Niles Township. My first teaching experience was at another Catholic school on the southwest side, right out of college with no experience. I got hired at Mother Macaulay, which is another girls' Catholic school. And that was very good for me to sort of hone my skills. And from there, I moved on to Morton East and Cicero and loved teaching there, but they were kind of in transition, had some gang issues going on. One of my supervisors from that school moved up to the Niles district, which was very helpful for me to get my foot in the door at the time and turn over my resume. And I taught in Niles West and mostly at Niles North for 5 years.
Interesting. Like, yeah, I went to Niles North myself in the mid-90s. Well, like, how long were you teaching in the northern suburbs?
In the northern suburbs, just pretty much the last 5 years.
And how important is like the teaching instruction and like being like familiar with the students?
Yeah, I think at the high school level, it's very important to be familiar with your students. And I've said this over and over again. For a while, I was just sort of a stay-at-home mom, and because I have a master's in curriculum and have all that high school experience, I kept getting asked to be on different committees. And I would say on every committee I was on, that it's important for high school students to have at least one adult in the building, preferably one teacher in the building that they trust and they can go to.
And like, how do you like gear them to college versus trade schools and other like even like fine arts schools?
That's a very good question, and I think it's changed over the years from when I started teaching. I mean, my first teaching job was in 1985, and so and I taught for 20 years then. And then I went through this process with my own kids. Right now I work with college students and with adults. And I think over the years it's really changed. For a while, I think we're pushing everybody to go to college. And college I don't think is necessarily the right fit for every kid, especially having gone through the pandemic recently. I think not all kids are ready right now for college. So taking a gap year, working for a little while, exploring the trades, those are all good things. And you have to really know the students. You have to take the time to invest in the students and see where they're at.
And look, what did you do with curriculum and instruction?
Can you ask me that again?
Oh, like what type of like talents and I guess like focus points did you learn through curriculum and design of instruction?
That's a good question. So my master's, when I went back for my master's degree, I'd already been teaching for a while, so I had some teaching experience. And so I went back with an emphasis on curriculum and instruction, so design and instruction. What I've learned from that was really how to value and decide what's valuable to teach. Also, at the time I was getting my master's degree, the information age was starting to change. The internet was just becoming a thing, and then it took off, of course, 10 years later from that. But so it's not about teaching a subject for a student to command a subject, but about teaching students how to use the tools they have to get to the right place or the right answer.
And how do you like the artificial intelligence movement? Like,
yes, I'm not a big fan of the artificial intelligence movement. I think I grew up in the era when we were still very leery of the artificial intelligence movement. I think for a teacher, there's two problems. I mean, one is there's too much possibilities of plagiarism that can take place. High school students aren't always the most scrupulous, not necessarily on purpose, but always young people will always look for the easy way out. And then I'm just concerned, like everyone else, I think right now we need a little bit more regulation on the AI industry as a whole.
Do you believe like through like there's lots of like different types of theses like that Zoom and like going through the internet like harbors like their creativity, creative writing, like a lot of people didn't get that hands-on instruction through the COVID era. Do you believe that the instruction has failed like children like through Zoom and everything else electronically?
So I think what we're finding is, and it's interesting that you brought it up because I just was listening to a story on NPR this morning on this very topic. I think what we're finding now, a couple of years out, is that it depended on whether the students were engaged or not. So when we had to pivot super fast as a nation and so many kids went to Zoom or went to online learning, not all households were equipped to handle that. Not all kids had the supervision they need to make them stay online. So there's definitely a loss there. The other piece is even when we have kids in affluent areas or with fantastic school systems like we do here in Glenview, we're a blue ribbon district across the board, is that there is a component, a socialization component that was unfortunately missing. I think in hindsight, as a nation, we did the right thing because we weren't in control of this virus and it could have been a lot worse. We could have lost a lot more lives and a lot of kids' lives. So it was a necessary thing. Now we just need to recover from that.
And when did you start transitioning yourself from being a teacher to an artist?
That's a good question also. So I taught for 20 years and then I was a stay-at-home mom. I had my kids later in life and it afforded me the opportunity to more time to do what I loved, which was pottery. When I went back to Little Street Art Studio, I had both mentors at Little Street who were encouraging me to go farther with my work, and then also friends in Glenview who very politely told me to start selling my work.
Wow. How long did it take you like to start like your studio and like your own line of pottery?
I think I'm still developing my own line of pottery.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of tweaking and playing with what I like to do. I'm inspired by my kids a lot. I'm inspired by my friends. I make functional pottery, so that's things that can be used every day or some days or for holidays. I make a lot of jewelry. So I'm always looking for new inspiration. I love learning new techniques.
What is the name of your line?
It's 50 Blue Pottery.
And who is that reflecting, or what is that name like representing? Like,
So
tell me the story.
it's kind of it's a little complicated story. When I was much younger, my dad and I used to sell things at the flea market, and I always liked the idea of 50 shades of blue. And then there was this thing the books that came out, the 50 Shades of Gray. I was like, well, it can't be that. So I kept with the 50 blue theme. And another piece of it was that I draw a lot of my inspiration for my work from traveling. Before I turned 50, when I was in my early 40s, I realized I only had a few more states to see before I would get to all 50 states. And they all have blue skies. So
nice.
I kind of drew those two things together and filed for business name with 50 Blue Pottery in my early 40s.
Do you have a favorite state that you visited?
California.
Oh, nice, nice. And how do you select, like, do you have like a grade of like pottery, tell me the process of how you make your pottery that you sell and the whole manufacturing process, and you select the clay.
Right, so all the pottery is made by hand, so none of it is manufactured. So I select the clay based on which studio I'm at. The studios I teach at Northwestern right now and at Little Street Art Center. So there are different grades of clay for different temperatures that we fire our clay to when we put the glaze on. I like to work with porcelain. Porcelain's of course expensive, but it's a softer clay. It's very pretty when it's fired. It's nice white. You can get it look very translucent, and kind of decide what I'm going to do with that clay. Am I going to make a bowl? Am I going to make mugs? Do I want to work on jewelry? And go from there.
Is there different types of grades of porcelain? Like, how do you weight like the quality, for example?
There are different grades of porcelain. There are different firing temperatures for porcelain too. So I've actually still been sampling a lot with the pandemic. One of the problems was that the the makers of the clay, because we don't go dig up the clay by the river anymore like they used to do back in the old day.
Yeah.
Although Glenview is filled with clay
Yes.
under all of the lawns here in Glenview, we can't really dig that clay up and fire it. We'd have to do some testing with it. I wish we could, because my backyard's filled with clay. But so I buy my clay from a supplier, and the clay suppliers had a really hard time getting the ingredients they needed to put together the porcelain during the pandemic. Because for true porcelain, you need kaolin, and kaolin comes from the Kaolin region in China.
Oh.
So I've been sampling a lot of different companies and different manufacturers of the porcelain and seeing which ones I like.
Is there like Irish porcelain or Italian, like for like vintage? Like how do you like?
Well, in the
see,
vintage,
like,
in the vintage world, it's a little bit different. So I also dabble. I've been dabbling in vintage, buying vintage, going to estate sales since I was a young teenager with my father. In the vintage world, yes, there's definitely Italian porcelain, that comes from China, when we call
English,
dishes China,
yes.
because they predominantly came from that type from China. And there's also clays that are manufactured in commercial studios like Fiesta Ware here in the United States that use sort of a blend of clay, a blend of stoneware and porcelain to create what they make.
And I was just wondering, where do you sell your artwork or your craft?
So I do have a website that's www.50bluepottery.com. I also go to art fairs around town. I had 7 art fairs this summer, which was maybe a little bit too much for me, but that was a lot of fun. And I'll be at some holiday shows this holiday season.
Are you a member of the Glenview Art League?
I am a member of the Glenview Art League.
And do you have your own Etsy website and everything?
I have had an Etsy website in the past. I have kept it, but I haven't kept it up as much since I have my own website.
And do you have any tips for future artists, professional teachers or artists? What is the key point of finding your passion?
The key point of finding your passion is if you enjoy it, go for it and do it. It's you need to be able, though, to invest the time into not just creating your work, but then marketing your work. I'm very good at creating my work. I'm not so good at marketing my work.
And how do you tell students, in instruction, to steer them to professional design versus a hobby? Do you have 12th grade? Do you ever talk to the parents saying that I wanted to go to the Art Institute or I wanted to take a gap year?
Yeah, so I actually haven't done that lately because I haven't worked with that age group in a while. The people I'm working with right now are either in college at Northwestern or they're young adults just out of college who are taking classes at the Little Street Art Center.
And for Northwestern University students or anybody in the Little Street area, how do you judge the quality of artwork, for crafts? I know those judging art fairs can be very critical.
So the great thing about taking a pottery class is that you're not graded on your work, which is good because I don't think I could grade, because you need to grade effort, how much time did they put into it, are they trying, do you see improvement, and I always see that in my students. Every once in a while there's a student that'll get completely frustrated and give up and walk away, and that's fine. That just wasn't the right fit for them.
And how many art fairs have you been involved this year?
This year I participated in 7 this summer.
And do you have any scholarships available through the Art League, or is it straight?
The Glenview Art League does have a scholarship available for a senior in the Glenview area at one of the Glenview high schools. It could be for Glenbrook South or one of the private schools. Every year they offer this scholarship, and sadly they don't have a lot of kids apply, but it's out there. And then the student that wins the scholarship is also invited to participate in the summer art fair that the Glenview Art League has.
Nice. And Patty, just tell me, how do you like the Glenview schools for your own children and as a parent?
The Glenview schools are fabulous. We moved to Glenview 22 years ago, and we moved based on school districts. Since I was working at Niles North then, I knew I wanted a high-performing academics for my kids, but I also wanted diversity. Diversity is very important because that's what the real world is like. And the Glenbrooks, the Glenbrook South school offers that. The academics are incredible. They don't just put all of their money into supporting the sports teams. They have one of the highest number of clubs and activities that are non-athletic at any school across the nation. And I think that makes a really big difference for kids.
And tell me, like, what are your children doing now?
So my children are, my oldest is a podcast editor for iHeartRadio. My second daughter is still in college. She's majoring in music production at New York University. And my son is a journalism major at DePaul.
Wow, that's very interesting, like diverse, like pathways.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have like any like future endeavors in teaching ceramics?
Yes, I will be continuing to teach the next 2 quarters at Northwestern. I teach in the Norris Center at Northwestern, and then I'll also be teaching at the Little Street Art Center in Ravenswood in Chicago.
And tell me, like, how does like fine arts like change pathways for like children that like are in high risk areas or like gang activities? Like, how does that steer them into education or out of the streets?
So experience has shown the more opportunities the kids have who are in high-risk areas, and especially in the city of Chicago, the more opportunities they have to participate in something like the arts or sports, the better that they will do and the more they'll succeed both in school and in life.
And do you have like any like endeavors like of expanding your line or going through like more pottery? And where can I find your website at?
Yeah, so again, my website is just www.50bluepottery.com, and I am going to continue to work with pottery as long as I can.
And how safe is pottery? Like, is it like, I know like there are like interesting like articles saying that like you cannot drink from the glazing or the glazing had different cancers. Like pottery like is based on like the quality of porcelain and everything else?
That's a good question. So a lot of the glazes that were made years ago were made with chemicals that now we know are not necessarily good for you. Mm-hmm. So years ago, for example, to get a really bright red, you would add lead to your mix. So now we know that's not so good. You can buy commercial glazes. Blick is a big seller over the counter, and on the commercial glazes of the various companies that sell them, there are symbols to tell you whether a glaze is food safe or is not food safe. I only use food safe glazes on all of my products. Also, both of the studios I teach at Northwestern's Norris Center and at Little Street, we only create food safe glazes. And that's one of the things that I teach my students in the beginning classes right away is what makes a glaze food safe and then ensures that your product is food safe and what doesn't make it food safe.
And how do you appraise like your work, and then like how do you buy vintage, and how do you know like what like basically like the real thing, the real McCoy? Like I know there's lots of shows saying like how do you like sell like your work and buy?
Right, so it's sort of two different questions in two different worlds. So in my creating brand new artwork and new ceramics, it's impossible for any artist, unless you're at the top echelon of being an artist, to get what you put into the work out in payment like per hours or per time. But you can compare your work to other work that's out there on various markets, see what it's selling for, kind of match that up to your work, and sell it at that price. And that's what I do with my ceramic work. In the vintage world has sort of changed on demand and what people are looking for, what they want to buy. For example, things like depression glass used to be well sought after in the late 80s and the 90s, and the price was high. And now people don't really want that anymore. The same with sort of high-end china. Lines like Wedgwood and Bleak were sought after, very expensive, and now there's just not a market among young people for that. So you kind of have to just do your research, look at the various websites, see what things they're selling for to figure out what you can sell it for.
Thank you, Patty, for this educational conversation about pottery and ceramics and I guess like instructional design.
Thank you. It's been fun speaking with you today.
Thank you for watching Real People, Real Matters. This is Diana Tulchinsky with my guest, Patty Marfise.